Okay, hi everyone, this is SmithyQ from SmithyQ.com. I'm here to look at another miniature game this week. This one is a bit special, in fact, because this is probably my favorite chess game of all time. It's Rotlewi Rubinstein, 1907, often known as Rubinstein's Immortal game. It's absolutely fantastic, it's beautiful. I was about 1300 rating when I first saw this game, and it made me fall in love with Rubinstein. I went over, I tried to find all of his games, study all his games, and then it took a bit, about 20 games or so, before I realized, hey, wait a second, he usually wins by rook endgames and strong positional play, not sacrificing queens and rooks all over the place. So, if you've never seen this game before, hopefully I do it justice. Hopefully I can, inspire you enough to be like, wow, this is how chess should be played. So if we look at the first few moves here, it's a standard Queen's Gambit-ish position, right? Nothing to look here at the first 5 moves. It's perfectly symmetrical. It's perfectly equal. We got the pawns out. Both knights are on their best squares. And it's, yeah, easy. And then, though, White makes his first mistake here. He plays d takes c5. The reason it's a mistake is because Black's bishop goes there in just one move, right? He's able to take the pawn. This is a loss of a tempo. What White wants to do, for instance, is if you're to do something else, and then Black does something, and then he takes recapture, he's got this bishop out, right? So he's got this extra tempo. He's got an extra move now. He can castle right away. Where if you look in the game, by taking, Black is then able to recapture. It's the exact same position, but this bishop hasn't moved yet. So White has lost time. In fact, this is actually obvious. If you just look at this position, Black has 3 pieces developed, White has only 2. And so White's lost time. Now, is this a big deal? You might argue, no, it's not. Can Black do anything right now? But what's amazing about this game is essentially how Black, Rubinstein, takes 2 of these small, slight losses of tempo and then essentially turns it into a winning position in 20 moves. It's fantastic, unbelievable, which shows at the highest level of how important these small mistakes can be and how we want to get rid of them. What should have White done instead? Well, if White wants to take, which is perfectly fine, he should wait until this bishop moves. So he could move his own bishop, but then Black would probably do the same thing. So it seems to me that White kind of has 2 options here. He could take here, leading to probably an isolated queen pawn position, or he could play something like b3, move the bishop over on this side, move his queen, and just really, really force Black to move this bishop before taking the pawn. Right? Those are the 2 general options, but instead he took. Black took back, and then we had a3 and a6. Both sides are getting ready to play b4 or b5 and develop the bishops on the long diagonal, as we'll see in a second. So we have b4, kicks the bishop back. Bishop goes on this slice diagonal, castle. And then here's where White makes his second mistake, where he plays queen d2. Which again, when you first look at it, doesn't look like a huge issue. The queen can't really be attacked, right? I mean, if the knight tries to jump in, it can always be taken. So what's the problem? The problem is that we see there's this tension here on these pawns. And so very likely this is going to get exchanged, and so the d file is going to open up. What Black is going to do, we'll see it in a second actually, let me just delete the arrows, is he plays queen e7, and now he's ready to perhaps exchange pawns and then move this rook to the d file where it's now eyeing the queen. That's not very comfortable for the queen. The queen's going to want to move, and then that's going to cost a tempo, so the queen will have to move again. Now again, is this a big thing by itself? No, it's not, but it's not optimal. And if we keep making suboptimal moves as the second one in a row, then pretty soon our position becomes worse and worse, to the point where our opponent can launch something big. Just sort of, if you give an idea, if you've ever, just sort of go to the very beginning of the game here, if you've ever looked at computer analysis of this position, it's going to say that White has an advantage of like plus 0.3, right? Small advantage, and it might grow, it might not grow. Right? Not really important. But if we were to do this, if white were to do this, then we get the exact same position, but now it's black to move. White's wasted time. It's black to move. It's essentially the exact same thing as if it were this and this, right? But instead, we got doom, doom, doom. And now if we were to look at it, it's now black who would have the 0.03 advantage. So if you look at that, from +3 to -3, that's essentially half a pawn. So every tempo, you could think about this, is worth roughly half a pawn. And so if we go through the game again, right, we go here, perfectly equal position, and then, well, white just handed a tempo to black, which is roughly half a pawn. And then we keep going here, and then we've got, he moves his queen to this ungood, to this less good spot. You're gonna have to move it again. That's another half pawn right there. And so you could think about this, right? If you're being really materialistic, thinking like a computer, is that black has a pawn's worth of tempi, of an advantage in that. He's essentially up a pawn. That's one way to think about this. If we now, pawn's a pretty big deal. Let's keep going. So the queen moved, this bishop developed, and then black he took. Right, so it took 2 tempi for the bishop to get there, as opposed to 1. Then we have b5, bishop d3. Here comes the rook. Rook slides over d8. Again, queen isn't very comfortable, so it moves away. Bishop b7. Castle. And again, if we were just to freeze, just look at this position in general. So what's happened? Both sides have developed. In fact, it's essentially identical. All the pawns, white and black, are on the identical squares. All the minor pieces are on the same squares. Even the queens are on their respective mirrored squares. There's 2 differences. First, this rook has already been developed. So this rook, it's castled, it's okay. But this rook is here, it's on the open file. And the second thing is that it's black's move again. And so black can do something. So the position is equal, but black has an extra move, and it's his turn to move again. With these 2 small advantages, black is then able to turn a position into something much better. And then white's future mistakes, they compound on themselves, because already he's slightly worse. Again, it doesn't look like much. Honestly, it is little. And if Rubinstein wasn't a world-class player, one of the best players of all time, this is probably a nothing. Wouldn't mean anything. But because Rubinstein's Rubinstein, it turns into something great. So the first thing he does is he plays knight e5. And the idea behind this is already we can see this bishop eyeing down towards the king. This bishop eyeing down towards the king. This knight can easily jump in to g4, eyeing towards the king. And so black is seeing that he has this potential threats already. White's best defender is the knight. And if he can exchange the knight, then, well, he's going to do absolutely fantastic and he'll have a ready-made attack. And already, white needs to be extremely careful. For instance, in this position, if we were to just play a normal move, let's say he develops his rook, so he plays rook c1. Well, then what's going to happen is he loses instantly, because after take, bishop takes h2 check, rook against the queen, white lost his queen, just like that. If we back up, if he plays a different move, maybe he moves this bishop away. Well, now all of a sudden, the attack comes full stop. We've got, we take with the knight. He can't take with the queen because of the bishop. And after the pawn, well, black can now play knight g4, which at first you're just thinking, holy cow. But then, if you try and take it, it's actually checkmate right away. Oh. And so we can't take it. But if you don't take it, we've got a knight, a bishop, queen ready to come in, potential sacrifice as this pawn is attacked. White is in huge trouble if he's not just lost in this position. And so with going back, really the only move is to take the knight. And then after take back, again, all these pieces are still aimed at the king. And now white here, he starts with this incorrect plan, which is incredibly logical if you look at it. In fact, when I am white, when I'm staring at this position, this is the first idea that comes to my mind. And when I'm looking at, I imagine many amateur players like me are thinking the same thing. Is, well, I can get f4 in. And then the bishop retreats, e4. Black moves his rook over, e5. Doesn't that just look natural? We're advancing our pawns, we're aiming towards the king, we've got, our own ideas of potentially coming in with an attack. Now this knight has to move. This knight is ready to jump into e4. We've got a lot of interesting ideas here. Doesn't it look natural? Can you believe that by doing this, white is just lost? It does seem amazing. And the best way I can explain this is to just show the huge loss of time that has just happened. Well, first, I'm just going to show you the next 3 moves. So we have first we have a bishop check, one of the downsides moving the pawn, and then black's knight suddenly jumps in here. If we look at this position, let's back up for a second. So this is the position in which white has just took the black knight. So the knight had jumped into e5, and then white exchanged it. Now let's look here. Let's just do this a couple times. Here, 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 here. What is the difference in white's position? Well, none of his pieces have moved, if we go from here to here, right? All of his pieces are on the same square. His king is now stuck over a bit in the corner. His pawns have moved. His pawns have advanced. And we can see, actually, these pawns are kind of... The advanced pawns are actually a weakness, because this diagonal... The knight want to jump in here, maybe. Very weak. If we converse, let's look at black's position. What's the difference in black's position from here to here, here to here? Well, we can see this rook has moved over onto the c-file. This knight has advanced closer to the king, and this bishop is now on a fantastic diagonal. It went from here to over here. This is time. This is tempi. White, if we back up from here, has spent his last 3 moves playing essentially logical, natural moves, right? He plays f4, he plays e4, he plays e5. But those are all pawn moves. They haven't improved any of his pieces. This rook is still sitting here in the corner doing nothing. This rook, I guess it's on this semi-open file. It wants to start advancing the pawn. But compared to black's 2 rooks, which are dominating 2 fully open files, look at black's bishops, which are staring directly at black's king. Now, white's bishop here, it's doing a very good job as well. This bishop is staring at its own pawn, which is a disadvantage of moving the e-pawn all the way there. This is time. Black has used white's loss of time, just using his pawns, to make his pieces much better, and he, in fact, in this position, has irresistible threats. The first thing we want to just look at is what happens. This knight is hanging, right? So can he just take it? Well, if he does, then black has taken, he takes the piece right back, so it's not like he sacrificed anything. He's now got the white bishop. Again, if we were to back up, if we were to ask ourselves what is white's best piece, it's probably this bishop. Right? Like, this knight's okay. Again, this bishop stares at his own pawn. Rooks aren't doing much. This is the most active piece. And so if he exchanges it for the knight, he's just lost his piece. And now look at this bishop. This bishop is now completely unimposed. It's going to stare down at this pawn, and white's in trouble. Notice how there's 2 pieces attacking the knight, and so if white defends it, well, black's going to do this, attacking the bishop, also attacking this pawn. That's game over. If white tries to stop that, well then black is going to exchange his rook for the 2 minor pieces. Now look at this. These 2 bishops, completely unimposed, staring down at the king. Rook, completely open file, threatening this pawn. Queen can slide over or slide back. We just have to make sure we don't fall for any back rank mates, potentially. But black is absolutely dominating in this position. White's got no real chance here. So that's why, instead of taking the knight, white played bishop e4. And the idea, again, he wants to oppose this bishop. which is staring menacingly at his own king. Because if the bishop exchanges not for the knight, but for the bishop, maybe he's doing okay. Black doesn't care about that. He brings his queen in. So now we've got a checkmate threat right here on the on h2. Notice how all of Black's pieces are coordinating beautifully. Rooks on open files, bishops on open diagonals, queen and knight. Almost all of his pieces are staring at the king. Where White's are not doing anything, and this rook is still sitting in the corner, not doing much. In the game, White played g3, which allowed perhaps the most fantastic finish I've ever seen in a chess game. Everything is just so beautiful, it's so powerful, it's so logical. We start by sacrificing the rook. Rook takes c3. Unbelievable. Sacrificing a full queen. You gotta take it, right? You got to take the queen. If you don't, well, that's check. Only real stop is this. That's mate. So we can't take the rook. So we take the queen. But hey, we're up a queen, right? And things might look okay until the next move. Where all of a sudden, first he sacrifices a queen, now he sacrifices a rook to bring it down. And the idea is to distract the queen from defending this bishop. Notice also if the queen were just to back up, then rook takes h2 would be mate. So of course he takes the rook, the bishop falls. This is the only move, bring the queen back. He is up a queen, so getting the queen back would be not too bad for White. But then comes the killer blow, rook h3. And there's no defense to rook h2 checkmate. Again, the queen is pinned, so the queen can't move. Queen can't do anything. This bishop staring at this square. Fantastic. What a beautiful final position. And this combo, this whole idea, starting from right here, when the queen comes in, then after g3, sacrificing the rook. Well, I guess sacrifice the queen, right? Then sacrificing the rook. All for this beautiful final coordinated attack against the king. It's fantastic. How can you ask for more? And again, if we were to back up and we were to ask, what was White's mistake? It all starts from the beginning. Where here, he gave Black a tempo. He lets the bishop develop in one move. Where if we see, later in the game, Black waits until the bishop moves, and then he takes to get to essentially the same position. But he's up a tempo. And then White has to lose another tempo because his queen is very, very nervous standing in front of this rook. That's 2 tempi right there. Black now he threatens that whole attack. And then White does the most natural thing in the world, where he tries to advance his pawns, right? He wants to get his own attack going, but he doesn't realize that being down in time, these pawn advances, they aren't strengths, they're simply weaknesses, which allows this absolutely beautiful finish. It's worth pointing out here, just for completeness' sake, that after h3, the exact same idea would work for Black. Instead of moving the knight, instead of doing anything, rook takes c3. And then, well, if you take the rook, you can't take the knight because it's pinned. Right? The pawn is pinned. And if you take the rook, then after bishop takes e4, well, now the threat is queen takes h3 checkmate, because this pawn is also pinned. Then White essentially has 2 moves here. If he just takes the bishop like this, well, after queen g3, we're threatening mate on h2. You take the knight, and then this is checkmate. So it'd be mate in 2 moves. If you try and take this instead, well then, after take, rook comes down. Now we're threatening rook h3 checkmate. And there's no way you can defend that and save the bishop. And so you're going to be down a piece, and, well, that's game. And so that was it. Again, again, let's just look at this again. What a fantastic game, beautiful game. Rubinstein was absolutely amazing. Still probably my favorite game of all time. Okay, so that's that. I'm, again, SmithyQ from SmithyQ.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Tell me if you like that. Give me feedback. I love feedback. Tell me what you want me to do a video on next. I've got a video on castling, attacking the castled king, especially if the king castles very early. That's going to be coming up possibly later this weekend. So keep an eye out for that. And otherwise, yeah. Love feedback. Tell me what you want. And I'll see what I can do. So again, SmithyQ, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.